Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Juanita Boothroyd, and I'm a professional member of the Tarot Guild of Australia and also a committee member. I feel it is a great privilege to introduce Evelynne Joffe to you today. She is a teacher of Kabbalah and Tarot. She has studied and worked extensively in the occult field for many, many years. She's a qualified astrologer and also conducts Kabbalistic dream groups. She's Vice President of the Tarot Guild of Australia and also a Director and Tutor at the Institute of Esoteric Studies here in Melbourne. She's played an enormous part in the creation of this conference. Please welcome Evelynne Joffe.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. I'm very, very happy to be here today. I'm very thrilled to be at this conference. Something that started off as a casual remark in a committee meeting one night about 18 months ago has resulted in this. And it's a very great personal thrill for me personally, and I'm just overwhelmed. So if I start crying at some stage during this speech, please forgive me. Now, the Hanged Man. When you first started studying tarot, I'm sure that you looked at this picture of this strange figure hanging upside down. And I'm sure that many of you wondered, what was this figure doing hanging there? I suppose some people could say hanging loose. Also, what connection was there between this card and that pretty awesome card that actually follows it, the Death card? In any discussion of the Hanged Man, we have to take the following card, the Death card, into account, as I'm sure you will realize as I speak. The traditional and mundane meaning of the Hanged Man card is the meaning of a sacrifice of an aspect of yourself. Very often we read the word martyr in connection with this card. I hope to illuminate this meaning a little bit today. Arthur Edward Waite, in Pictorial Key to the Tarot, said of the Hanged Man, "It is a card of profound significance, but all the significance is veiled. I will say very simply, on my own part, that it expresses the relation in one of its aspects between the divine and the universe." So why did I entitle my talk Suicide or Death? These are fairly strong words. In any esoteric, and by esoteric I mean hidden as opposed to exoteric or revealed teachings, death is viewed as a state of transition. In fact, we can describe birth and death as being two sides of the same coin. When we are born to this life, we die to the other life, and vice versa. We are taught in the Kabbalah that when we are born to this life, the soul is always sad, because of the knowledge of the painful and toilsome path of evolution. When we die to this life, we are born to the other higher life, in inverted commas, always in joy. This is the natural cycle of creation. Apart from this very important death, the death of the body, there are many other deaths or transitions in our lives. Every time we change something, the old way will die. Again, the natural cycle of creation. In Australia, we only need to look around us at the bushfires. The old trees have to die so that the seeds can create a new tree. When we do not welcome or allow a death process in our lives, we are in essence committing suicide. We are not opening ourselves up to the potential of rebirth or recreation. This is very important to realize. We are refusing to continue with the process of change, usually because we are filled with fear. But there could also be other reasons. We could be comfortable in the old way. Our uncomfortableness becomes comfortable. We are used to it. And even though we know somewhere deep inside that our lives could be different, we ignore that little voice. This is what I call suicide. The dictionary defines the word suicide as intentional self-slaughter. When we deliberately ignore the potential for a new life, we are slaughtering that new life. This process of the hanged man is us, first of all, putting our lives into a state of suspension, into a state of waiting until we have courage enough to let go of the old so that there can be a change in our lives. So the card of the hanged man is therefore also the state of suspension or of being in limbo. This is a really interesting word, limbo. It originally meant the region on the border of hell, where in the Christian mythology the soul wandered and waited. It is a state of neglect or oblivion. If we are in limbo for too long, we will never find our way out of there. Before anything more can be said about the hanged man, it's very important to look at this card's placement on the tree of life. The tree of life is the glyph or the symbol of the Kabbalah, which is the esoteric teachings of Judaism. And that's what it looks like. It's a map of creation. It is a map of the emanation of God. It is a map of the soul's evolution through its numerous incarnations, and as well a map of our psychological evolution through each lifetime. Every single human and spiritual action and process can be placed on this tree to gain insight into it. This tree consists of 3 pillars. We have a black pillar over here named severity. We have a white pillar over there named mercy, and a middle pillar named equilibrium, and in this drawing mildness. The outer pillars are depicted in the cards of the High Priestess and Justice in the Rider-Waite Tarot, as well as many other tarot decks, and in some other decks in the Hierophant cards, and also the Emperor. They are the 2 pillars that stood outside the temple in Jerusalem, and the 2 pillars that stand in every Masonic and ritual temple to today. At various spots, as you can see on the transparency, there are circles. These circles are held together in these places according to laws. They are called the Sephirot, or we could just call them the spheres. They represent stages that the soul travels on its journey towards manifestation down the tree, and stages that the soul travels in evolution up the tree. On a more mundane level, they also represent the stages of any process or thought towards manifestation. When we, as tarot readers and tarot students, want to contact a deeper understanding of the meaning of the cards, knowledge of the meanings of the paths of the tree are essential. Those are the major arcana placed on each path of the tree. The tarot cards of the major arcana are placed on these paths and studied in accordance to the qualities of these paths. So what we can see when we look at this diagram, that the hanged man lies on this path here, and it hangs between a circle called Hod and another circle called, the correct spelling is with a V, Gavura. It lies on the black pillar. This is a black, negative, passive, feminine pillar called severity. It is a reflective path rather than active. And at first glance at the picture of the card, we can see that. If we look at that statue there by Genevieve Brannigan, we can see this is not an active archetype. He's not doing anything. It is not an active image. Now the Sephirot that this path connects have quite different energies. Hard down here is the sphere of the intellect. It is thought, it is communication. It's part of this personality triangle at the bottom of the tree. in that way it is still part of our ego consciousness. Gevura up here is a fiery sphere where all that is unnecessary is burned away. And we can also call it a sphere of revolution. So if we think about the meanings of these two spheres, we can explain the meaning of the card: intellect and revolution. We are on a path joining our conscious thinking processes and the processes of revolution or new thinking. If we look back at the mundane meaning of this card, this is where we are suspended alone in a state that is necessary. For the outside world could be very overwhelming when we are in this state. It is not possible that this process can be fast. It needs to be slow. In this period of suspension, a necessary reversal is required. A reversal in the way we mentally understand something. It requires a quieting of the mental busyness. We need to be suspended for a time of waiting so that our thought processes can undergo a radical change. So this is a time of the suspension of our ego, or our sense of who we are, which will lead to the sacrifice of that ego so that we can give birth to a new perspective or a new way of thinking. Therefore, the death depicted in the Hanged Man card is the death of that ego, which will lead to a rebirth, and this is, in its highest sense, a spiritual rebirth. In Dark Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross, St. John speaks of his own Hanged Man experience. With his gentle hand he wounded my neck and caused all my senses to be suspended. I remained lost in oblivion. I have to say here that the only positive outcome of this situation of suspension is a transformation by some kind of ego death. Egotism must be given away. The sense that I, me, am the center of the universe has to change. Psychologically, we are losing our past certainties. It is only natural in this situation that we are filled with fear. Only a complete reversal of values will enable us to move on. And this is shown on this card as a reversal of the normal posture. He is hanging upside down. He has made a 180-degree turn. The card also shows that this figure here is communicating with the divine. And this is shown on the card by the aura shining around his head. So this process can certainly indicate, and does in its deeper meaning, a spiritual death as well. This card says that in the evolving soul, our actions in the world must not come out of ego. They must be in accordance with our higher self. This is a suspension of personal consciousness, leading to a reversal of perspective. In this time of hanging there, looking up to the heavens, we eventually become able to converse with God, or if you like, we are able to hear the voice of God, or the voice of the divine. Looking back to the old way is not the way to get through this process. That will just keep us hanging there. We will literally have to turn our heads backwards. Remember the Greek myth of Orpheus, who was warned by Zeus not to look back while leaving the underworld with his love Eurydice. Orpheus did not have enough faith in the gods to accept this. He looked back and lost his other half, his feminine half, who would have made him whole. In the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah, we have the same symbols. Lot and his family were saved by God. He was able to communicate with the higher self, but he was warned not to look back at the destruction of the old city, or allegorically, the old way of being. He did, through lack of belief or of faith, and his wife was turned into a pillar of salt. Again, that symbol of the loss of wholeness. Carl Jung, in his collected works, speaks of an initiation process whose purpose it is to restore to the soul the divinity it lost at birth. So following this Jungian theme, we can say that the negative side of the hanged man shows an extremely stuck, one-sided attitude. In Jungian terms, the only way out of the conflict between ego and self, with a capital S, or persona and shadow, is to turn literally upside down, to suspend all beliefs, which is a most painful experience for the ego. We have to let go of the only way of being that we know. Jung also says the counterpart of his conscious attitude will leave him no peace and will continue to plague him until it has been accepted. So there is a sense of inevitability about this card. And through speaking about this, we can now understand why this card is considered the lesser hero of the deck, as opposed to the greater hero of the chariot, which is directly above this card on the Tree of Life. A great deal of courage is required to move on. Kabbalistically, this card represents a moving on from the first dark night of the soul, where we realize how much of our mundane physical life is based on illusions. This is the process where we leave behind the personality triangle on the Tree of Life and some of our excess baggage that anchors us. Or in simple terms, we leave behind our games, our masks, our over-attachment to the material things of this world. And this card in the alchemical deck shows that, I think, quite well. He's losing his money. He's not too happy about it, but he's losing his money. We wake up one day with the realization that our lives are not moving on because we are too stuck in the outdated ways. Carl Jung says sacrifice means relinquishing all the ties and limitation which the psyche has taken over from childhood into adult life. Can't be comfortable, can it? Again, for the tarot student who works with the Kabbalah, the Hebrew letter on this path of the Tree of Life is as important as the card. The esoteric meanings of the letters will, once again, give a far deeper understanding of the meaning of the cards. The letter on this path is the letter Mem, a mother letter which means water, or more specifically, the water of life. Water is a universal symbol in many cultures, signifying the other consciousness, what we are not conscious of. And in many cultures it is considered maternal or life-giving. So already we have a contradiction. This is an inactive energy, but it is on a path being fed by the waters of life. So we could say that on this path we are drowned by the waters of life, so that we can recreate ourselves. Here for the first time comes in another concept, which is very common in most of the myths of the sacrificed ones, or the hanged ones, that of resurrection. Through the Kabbalistic science of Gematria, which is where the numerical values of letters and words are studied, it becomes possible to understand deeper meanings or codes hidden in the Bible, specifically the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of the Bible which make up the Torah. Breaking down the word Mem into numerical values connects it to another word, Netuya, which is only ever used in the connotation of God's outstretched arm which brings deliverance. In Exodus 6, verse 6, it is said, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of Egypt, and I will deliver you out of their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. So the meaning of this letter, Mem, the waters of life, always has a connotation of deliverance. Therefore, the meaning of this card also will always have a connotation of deliverance or of rebirth or resurrection. Kabbalah teaches us that when we are in bondage to limitation, because we live in a way that does not transcend where we are and how we are, or in very simple terms, we do not live our lives to our fullest potential, and when we realize that we are trapped or we are in slavery to this old way, and when we are miserable because of the slavery, then God or the divine will hear our cry and deliver us out of that slavery with an outstretched arm. In the Exodus, or the story of the Jews who escaped from Egypt, God delivered the Israelites out of the land of Egypt. In Hebrew, the word Egypt translates to Mitzrayim, which literally means confinement or limitation, into a land of milk and honey. So allegorically, this means that we will come out of a state of confinement to a state of consciousness that is perfect and complete, or this land of milk and honey that they searched for 40 years. What initiates this deliverance is our cry or our desire from the bottom of our broken hearts to be delivered. This desire will, of necessity, shatter the ego. We want change so desperately we are prepared to do anything. Kabbalah says that when the shell of the heart is broken, then the pure heart forms. This deliverance is not something that happens only once in our lives. Rather, it happens once each cycle of our lives. Each time we want to escape from what is trapping us or keeping us in slavery, we are delivered if we are prepared to allow the outstretched arm of the divine to show us the way. Each time we begin another life journey or spiritual journey, we begin it, as I like to say to my students, at a higher rate of vibrations. And in each of these journeys, we have to redo the lessons held in the major arcana of the tarot and in the tree of life at a higher vibration. This is called in Kabbalah the turning of the wheel. To understand any of the powerful archetypes in the major arcana, it is always beneficial to look at the myths that have grown around these archetypes. Myths like fairy tales are for growing up with. This is the way we understand deeper truths. They are diluted until we have the understanding and knowledge to look at them in their purest form. So these myths of dying gods and goddesses or sacrificed ones are universal and cross-cultural. As well, in the myths of these hanged ones, there is always a period of mourning and or of depression. One of the most powerful hanged man myths in Judeo-Christian mythology is the story of Christ. Who is mourned at the crucifixion by the two Marys, by his feminine, then by his apostles and by humankind. In all the other myths of the hanged ones from other ages and histories, there is always the sense of loss and of pain. This is the loss, if you like, of the innocence or youth of the heroes. Jung says depression should therefore be regarded as an unconscious compensation whose content must be made conscious if it is to be fully effective. Jung always said to go into the depression and to live it, not to mask it. The card of the hanged man symbolizes the dying god, and for this reason the symbol of hanged man and woman is common in many mythologies. It usually implies some kind of sacrifice for the higher god. The death of the god is a natural, continuing event, and is symbolized in ritual by the formula IAO, meaning Isis, Apophis, Osiris, or fruition, death, and resurrection. In its earliest forms, it was the necessary death of the king as sacrifice to ensure fertility of the land. Joseph Campbell says, "The hero of yesterday becomes the tyrant of tomorrow unless he crucifies himself today." The hero or heroine must always recreate him or herself. If we are not open to change or recreation, we will become outdated. So when we look back at these myths, we see that many have in them this theme of descent, crucifixion, and finally, resurrection. As I said, in the Christian mythology, we have the figure of Christ, who was sacrificed or crucified. Interestingly, in this period of history, most of those who were crucified were hung upside down, including Peter. But Christ is always depicted upright in the images. Jung says, "Nobody who finds himself on the road to wholeness can escape that characteristic suspension which is the meaning of crucifixion." So in this Christ story, we have the image of the Son God, S-U-N, or the Son of God, S-O-N, who is born from the Virgin, or the woman who is at one with herself, and in death hangs from the sacrificial tree. During this time of hanging, he suffers the taunts of those around him, a projection of fear from those who are not ready to make the reversal of faith that belief in him requires. The myth also states that he was sacrificed for the good of mankind, or that he became the scapegoat for humankind. Christ depicts a time in the world's history where an old order had to be revisioned. This revisioning necessitated a sacrifice, a time of suspension, a connection to the divine, and afterwards a resurrection to sow the seed of the new belief system. Only through his willingness to sacrifice himself to the higher good was the world able ultimately to bring his teachings into consciousness. When he hangs on the cross, he first cries out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" That is the initial stage of the hanging. And then he accepts his faith with the words, "Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit." That is the giving up. The Christ story is very like the Teutonic myth of Odin, the principal Norse god. And whose cult lasted long into the centuries following the advent of Christianity. Odin is this figure shown in the Heindel deck. It's pretty faint, but it's a very beautiful, beautiful card and a beautiful deck. This is the letter Mem up here. You can see it. Odin sacrificed himself willingly on the world tree, or Yggdrasil. He was wounded in his side by his own spear. Note the similarity to Christ. He hung there for 9 days and nights in order to attain the unconscious feminine knowledge of the runes. His blood spilt on Mother Earth as an offering. When he received the knowledge of the runes, he was able to magically restore or resurrect or recreate himself. He now had a new perspective. The old ego had died. In his time in the underworld, he had connected with the hitherto unknown part of himself, the feminine wisdom, and was reborn. Another very familiar myth on this path is the Greek myth of Prometheus. I knew I'd do that at some stage of the talk. We unconsciously want to put him the right way around. Prometheus was the Titan who loved humankind so much that he stole fire from the gods to give it to them, as depicted in this card of the mythic tarot. The name Prometheus means foresight or forward seeing. The difference between him and Odin is that he enters the state of suspension as punishment, not consciously. It is a result not of the sacrifice of ego, but of punishment for hubris of ego. How dare he think that he could steal fire from the gods? Many of us enter into this hanged man state in the same way, through an over-identification with ego. We become too stuck. We believe that this sense of I, being the center of the universe, is real. This will obviously make this period of suspension more painful. And in the myth, Prometheus is only released from his eternal punishment of having his liver torn away by an eagle every day to regrow at night by the willing self-sacrifice of Chiron, or the wounded healer. In Greece as well, we have the stories of the Greek Kabiri mysteries, or rites of initiation leading to resurrection. It is thought that the heart of the ceremony consisted of something being revealed to the initiates, something actually brought into a room in a sacred chest and then opened to them. As with many of the Greek mystery rites, we don't know exactly what happened. So only when this initiate showed him or herself ready, through going through rituals of hardship and of purification, would something secret or hidden be shown to them. In this initiation rite was known as the Kabiric death, after the myth of the Kabiri, where one brother is slain by three others. His dismembered body is discovered and is with great joy resurrected for the good of humanity. In excavations near Thebes, which is known to have been a center of the Kabiri mysteries, the vases discovered have shown scenes of birds and of pygmies. The pygmies seem to represent the lower aspects of human nature, and the winged birds, the power of elevation or connection to the divine. In other cultures, we have very familiar myths: the Egyptian Osiris, the Greek Attis, the Greek Dionysus, the Syrian Adonis, the Roman Mithra. These are all myths of sacrifice of the god or of the hero. They are all sacrificed and resurrected. The ceremonies and rites connected to these gods were all to do with the agricultural year and the identity of the saviour to the grain or to the crops. Common to all these mystery religions was the belief by participants that they were eating the body of the god in the bread. Do we notice the similarity to another ceremony that we do to this day? This is that willing self-sacrifice for the sake of the higher good. The last image or myth of the hanged man that I would like to discuss today is the myth of the hanged woman. This myth is very rare in the patriarchal mythos that forms part of the Western collective unconscious. All of the ones I spoke to you about before were men. This is the hanged woman. It is the story of Inanna, the oldest recorded myth of descent. She was the Sumerian queen of heaven and earth, and she made a decision and abandoned earth, abandoned heaven. To the netherworld she descended. She goes down to meet her dark sister, Ereshkigal, and to attend the funeral of the husband of Ereshkigal, Gugalana. Allegorically or symbolically, she makes a conscious decision to journey to find wholeness by leaving behind her safe land and by journeying into the unknown or the dark place or the underworld. In the myth, the process of descent is marked by a series of losses at each of the gates to the level of the to the levels of the underworld. A piece of Inanna's regalia or clothing is removed at each one of these gates, so that she can be brought into the presence of Ereshkigal, her dark twin, naked and bowed low. When we consciously welcome transformation or death, there will always be losses attached. Remember, on the original drawing of the Tree of Life, I pointed out that we are travelling towards the sphere where anything unneeded will be burnt away, the sphere of Gevura. Inanna is then judged by 7 judges in the underworld and is sentenced to death. This becomes the necessary crucifixion or suspension, and it is a very unpleasant death. She is hung on a hook like a piece of rotting meat for 3 days. When she has not returned to the upper world, her assistant, Ninshibur, goes to the highest gods to beg for help in rescuing her. Enlil, the highest god of sky and earth, refuses. So does Nanna, the moon god, and Inanna's father. Finally, Enki, the water god and god of wisdom, hears Ninshibur's pleas and rescues Inanna. Using 2 little mourners he creates from the dirt under his fingernail. They slip into the underworld, carrying the food and again water of life, and secure Inanna's release by sympathizing with Ereshkigal, who is now moaning and groaning in the pains of birth. As with many of these myths, an intermediary is needed to speak to the gods and to travel between the worlds. Inanna is released. She is fed the food and water of life, and she climbs back or ascends through the 7 levels. But she is no longer the same person who first set out on her journey. When you are reborn, you will never be the same as before. She has been marked by suffering. She is warned when she's in the underworld that she must send someone back in her place. When she returns to her home, she sees her consort, Dumuzi, sitting on her throne and regards him with the same eyes of death, and I love that expression, the same eyes of death that Ereshkigal had set on her. She has been marked by the suffering. He flees with the help of his sister, who offers to sacrifice herself in his place. But Inanna decrees that they shall divide the fate and spend half a year each in the underworld. Symbolically, here is the understanding that once we have made this journey, the place will always be known to us, and we will return. So here we have the very familiar motives once again. The conscious descent, the stripping bare of the soul, ridding oneself of the vestments of the ego. Inanna descends, she submits, and she dies. She is a willing sacrifice or initiate, and is then reborn stronger with a knowledge of her sister or dark half. This process of initiation or rebirth is a process of destruction of our old selves to be re-imaged into a new consciousness. As Sylvia Brinton Pereira says in her wonderful book, Descent to the Goddess, it means sacrifice to and for the repressed, undifferentiated ground of being, with the hope of gaining rebirth with a deeper resonant awareness. The word sacrifice, when you look it up in a dictionary, means an act of forfeiting or surrendering something of value for something considered of greater value. There's no point in sacrificing anything unless you're going to get something more from it. By sacrifice, you make sacred. Mary Reynolds says in The King Must Die, it is not the bloodletting that calls down power, it is the consenting, the willingness. It is the consenting. It is the willingness to hold on to God's outstretched arm when it is reached out to save you. So psychologically, this process of the hanged man is always experienced as painful and slow. We feel identified with whatever process we are closest to, and we can rarely find relief. The depression we go through, and which leads to our surrendering, is agonizing. We are forced to offer up what we hold precious. We do not know what this offering will bring as its reward. Our pain must be extreme to bring us to the point of total giving over of our will. This is when we cry to God, "I am empty, fill me up." This prayer in the depths of our despair depicts a mental or spiritual turnabout or a new perspective. It marks a pivot spot or a crossroads on the tree of life, or in the major arcana, or in our personal journey. This is a power spot where all the directions come together, where we win by surrendering. This is a sacrifice so that we can come out the other end stronger. And after the surrendering of will comes the welcoming of death or of transformation. The same way that after the hanged man card comes the death card, which shows in the card the rising of the sun or the beginning of a new life. So in the same way that the fetus is suspended in the womb in stillness in the waters of life, in this position we are suspended as a prerequisite to spiritual rebirth. This is where we are drowned in the water, and we find ourselves an inseparable part of higher consciousness. This is a card of the dying God on the waters of life. Remember that the values of the higher life are the reverse of the lower. So the necessary process towards death and not suicide is, number one, suspension. Number two, surrender. Number three, communication with the divine or with a sense of higher purpose. Number four, welcoming of the death, because, number five, we know there is a rebirth. Whereas suicide is, number one, suspension. Number two, inability to surrender the will. Number three, no sense of a higher power. Number four, becoming stuck, which leads to 5, a stiffening of the limbs and eventually atrophy. So only with our consenting to this experience of sacrifice and crucifixion can we, as the hanged man, connect to the divine. Through our acceptance of this dismemberment, can we then become remembered. When we accept something, in a sense, we choose it. And when we choose something, we are released from it. I would like to end this talk by quoting once again from Carl Jung. I think that most of you will agree that Jung spent a great deal of his life as the hanged man. He had a far different perspective to most people in the world of his time. He points out, as I said earlier, that sacrifice means to make sacred. So to sacrifice our ego-centered images is therefore to make our lives holy with an H and whole, W-H-O-L. Thank you. Heidelberg, we have a sense that he has gone past that number 3. He has already conversed with God. So this aura showing that he has a radiance. He knows that there is a higher self. He knows there is a different life. And I think that Rider-Waite particularly, I mean I love that deck because it is so pure, shows that very well. It's not that pain before, he has already spoken to God. And in the Odin myth, he makes that sacrifice willingly because he wants to get the feminine knowledge, so yes.
In the Heidel, in the Father of Cups, the sort of traditional version, he does that willingly, but it's very violent because he has to fight his own ego so much.
Yes.
Whereas in the Heidel's Man, Heidel portrayed the idea of willingly surrendering to the feminine, to the earth, and therefore there's no violence, there's no aggression about it.
I also think it's interesting that in many of the decks, the Hanged Man is shown as a very vital, alive figure. He is very potent. It doesn't look like an old man suffering. And in that sense, I think it's depicted that knowledge that there is a rebirth. There's a great strength there. Yes. Is that okay? Thank you. Jim.
Evan, how would you interpret the card reversed?
The card reversed? Well, I have to say I never read reverse meanings, ever. I go against a lot of tarot readers and I always read them as if they are the right way around. But if you read a number of tarot books, they say if you look at that Hanged Man turned upside down, it looks like he's dancing a jig. Oh, these things just won't. Just don't worry about picking it up, Jim. So if we turn it upside down, if we want to look at that symbology, he's a very happy fella. He's got the secrets already. He knows what he's doing. Yeah. I don't know. Any suggestions from anyone? I tend to say the chariot with the concrete over his head. One of the swords, yes. Maybe the Ten of Swords. That sense, but again we have the sense that we can pick ourselves up from that. Maybe the Two of Swords. Sorry? The Eight? Yeah. But I wouldn't see it really in the Major Arcana as we know it. Because the Major Arcana is a process. It's supposed to be walked through over and over and over again. But, the sense of the limbs atrophying, if we cannot cut ourselves down or do something, we become paralyzed totally. And that is the suicide, the self-slaughter. Anyone else?
I
Yes.
would just like to point out that James Hillman in Revisioning Psychology talks about, it's about soul recovery, and he says that he doesn't talk about it, but the hangman phase he calls that pathologizing, and it's a very important step when recovering the soul that trauma and going through strange circumstances forces us to realize that we have a soul.
Yes.
Because it's only when we are home and when we are distraught that we are forced to fall back on our essential resource, which is our soul, and then we see ourselves in our true spiritual essence.
Yes. I mean, personally for me, I went through a very difficult time at one stage. And I think I got through the Hanged Man when, instead of trying to fight it all the time and make it right in my head, I actually lay in bed one night and said, okay, well, I give up. Literally, fill me up. And I mean, the first thing that came to my mind was the 23rd Psalm. And from that moment on, I think there was a huge moving on. Because I said, I give over. I can't do anything here. Now you fix it for me, or you help me through it, or whatever. So yes, it is a total surrendering. Anyone else? Okay. No. Yes.
This is a very, possibly very silly question. In the Prometheus picture, the mythic tower, he seems to be sexually aroused. Why would there be a sexual arousal? Assuming that the picture has truth to it.
Okay.
Why would there be a sexual arousal in the stuff?
Rachel, maybe I'll let you answer that because you saw it.
Look at the picture.
Okay. Or maybe it's a sense of coming together. I mean, we can talk about that for hours in Kabbalah, where we can only be whole when we come together with our other half, and that's almost the sense that he is about to come together with his other half. But gee, I never saw that before.
The same sort of gravity-defying depiction can be seen in one of the drawings out here. I think it's in the star picture, where the breast really is it's not a vein at all, it's gravity.
Oh, okay. Yes, Paul.
I've never studied tarot before in my life. But,
Yes, Paul.
it's interesting because the deck shows the hanged man whose money is falling out of his pocket and a snake which wraps around him and entangled his ankle. Is that a valid deck? Because I've got no idea, but it seems to be almost a dichotomy between that and the rest of the decks, with a man who, even though he may be aroused, is hanging in harmony, always has the leg bent below the back of his knee, almost like a man walking on a tightrope. Peaceful, almost egocentric outlook on life. And then we have the one where a man's got an awkward position, his money's falling out, and there's a venomous snake hanging onto his ankle. Now, is there a linkage between the two?
I would say in that card, that is that process before the surrendering. So he's still fighting. He's looking backwards. He's seeing his money dropping out. He's thinking, well, do I want to do this or not?
Right. Which changes persona, his intellect, and his positioning 180 degrees.
Correct.
Okay.
That's my boy.
Before you move on, that one's hung by the left leg, all the others are hung by the right.
Oh, God. I don't know. I don't know. Are they really? Yes, they are. Jim, I have no idea. Any ideas, anyone? Is it? You mean it's more comfortable to bend the right out?
He's more aware of his left side of femininity.
Oh, yes, eh? He's more aware of the left side.
Well, yes.
Yes.
It sounds like the erection being a very masculine symbol, and the left leg perhaps having more to do with feminine.
Thank you.
Yeah, somehow.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes. Handle, yeah. Oh. Well, Rachel's the expert on the Handle deck. That's something to think about, this sense of potency. Now, there will only be a sense of potency if he has made the decision that there is more. He will be impotent if he has not moved on.
Also, his erection could hold seeds for the rebirth.
That's right, like the Australian bushfires.
And in all ancient shamanic tradition, the erection is there when the shaman goes into trance or things with the heart.
Okay, yeah, probably. Yes. And
In yoga terms, could be the kundalini.
the rising, yeah. Yeah, the sense that something is changing and moving on, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed.